Hello, welcome back to another week. Welcome back to another video. I hope you're all enjoying yourselves. I hope you're all having a lovely week. I am having a really nice week. The weather in Sydney, not to talk about the weather, but the weather in Sydney has been delightful. I have been very much enjoying going out on the town with my friends, going to little wine bars, going to the beach, swimming in the pool. My new apartment complex has a pool. Yeah, that's right. So no, I have been very much enjoying the warm weather. I'm so sorry to all you Northern Hemisphere baddies who are heading into winter. Actually, I'm not sorry because I actually love winter. I'm actually really jealous. But I'm trying to be positive. We're trying to be light and love. We're trying to embody all things good. So, speaking of light and love, let's talk about unlikable female characters. Just quickly before we get into that though, I am a hair's breadth away from 1,000 subscribers, which was my goal to hit by the end of the year. As I'm filming this, I think I'm like 15 away from 1,000. So if you are someone who watches all the time and you're not subscribed, please subscribe because I will literally pee my pants in excitement when I hit 1,000 followers. I got And so yeah, it would be really, really cool if you could subscribe, like, leave a comment. It helps the channel out, you know, it helps it grow, all that goodness. Okay, so let's talk about unlikable female characters. And I do feel the need to preface that when I say unlikable female characters, I'm not saying that as a negative. I personally don't think that... Obviously, it's different if a character has been written to be likable and they're actually really smackable. There are many, many instances in books and movies and whatever where you're supposed to be rooting for a character, but they're so unintentionally obnoxious that you hate them. I'm talking about characters that have been purposely written to be kind of terrible people, and it's done as like a literary device to make you sort of like to hold a mirror up to you as the reader and make you question things about yourself and our society and all these good juicy things. So I have 5 books that I'm going to talk about. I've tried to pick a couple that you may not have heard of. 2 of them are Australian authors. Let's go. So let's get into it. So the first book I want to talk about is a relatively new book by a debut Australian author, and that is Very Impressive for Your Age by Eleanor Kirk. I had the privilege of getting to go and listen to Eleanor speak about her writing process and what it was like to craft these characters and how much of herself was infused in the world of this book and the world of the characters. I got to hear her speak. That was really, really cool. I love hearing about the process that authors go to like come up with their characters and come up with the world, and how much of it is taken from their real life. And one of the things that the author for this particular book talked about was that her main character Evelyn is kind of unlikable, and that was something that kind of happened naturally over the course of the book, and I found that really interesting. So Very Impressive for Your Age is about our main character Evelyn, who is a Sydney girly pop who's moved overseas to pursue her lifelong dream career of being an opera singer. She has just landed her first big role, and I believe, if my memory is correct, it is the opening night of this big opera that she's so excited to be in, when she quite literally loses her voice mid-performance, just opens her mouth to sing and nothing comes out. She does sort of try and find a way around this, but eventually she realizes that she's going to have to go back to Australia, to Sydney, to move back in with her parents to see if she can kind of like work out what's going on with her voice and get it back. This kind of means like, I feel like for me, I grew up in a fairly small town. Like Sydney is a big city, but I feel like the different suburbs and different kind of niches within Sydney, if that makes sense, do kind of almost constitute small town. So I think for anyone, especially anyone working in a creative industry who has managed to leave your small town, the concept of having to give up that dream and go home with your tail between your legs is mortifying. So Evelyn is obviously feeling quite sorry for herself. She's dealing with a really odd family dynamic. She's dealing with frenemies. She's dealing with trying to work out what her life is going to look like without this one thing that she's had to define herself for all of these years. I think we all know someone like Evelyn, someone who is just so laser focused, like so goal orientated to the point that it becomes obnoxious, not like a credit to their personality. Evelyn is so singularly focused on her opera career that she has a real disdain and kind of smug attitude when it comes to anyone who doesn't believe in her, who doesn't understand her, who's, you know, who's starring in smaller performances and, you know, doing like the big fish in a small pond thing. And, you know, she's a little bit of a drama queen. And as a fellow dramatic little lassie, I feel like I could relate to that. Very impressive for your age. I do think does an incredible job of bringing like the gifted child to burnt out adult pipeline to life. I wasn't someone who went to a selective school, and most of the characters from within the world of this book are students who've known each other from a selective school and have like left and gone to uni. I do think the author has done a really, really good job. From going to her talk, Eleanor Kirk did mention that she herself went to a private selective school. And so I think she's done a really good job of towing the line of writing about a world that obviously like a small niche group of people will really understand and really relate to, but coloring that world enough to make it real and vivid for someone like me who has never experienced that. And I got a real sense of shape of the world that these characters move through. Just take a little break. They've been asleep all day.
3 hours later.
I really love stories where the kind of main plot arc of the book is the character finding themselves. And Evelyn, you know, bless her heart, she really goes through it. She kind of has to redefine the axis on which she has based every single decision she's ever made in her life. But also, like, let's be so for real. For most of the book, she's kind of an asshole. There is even a whole chapter, or not a whole chapter, but a whole section of the book where she kind of grapples with the thought of whether she might be a narcissist. One of the things that this author does really, really well, and I personally enjoyed as a fan of like Sally Rooney, is there throughout the book, without spoiling too much, the character has a couple of disassociative episodes, and those parts of the book are written from the third person perspective, where the parts where she's not disassociating are written in first person, so you're privy to her internal monologue and the internal world of the character. I really liked the fact that when Evelyn is forced to kind of take a step back from herself because she's disassociating, you as the reader are also sort of given that space because you're not privy to her internal monologue anymore. I just thought that was a really clever writing device by the author. But I do think Evelyn, you know, I guess that's the point of this video, right? Evelyn being kind of an asshole is what gives this book its charm, because you have not so much someone to root for, but you have something to root for. You watch Evelyn, as I mentioned, completely turn the axis of her life around and grapple with her own assholeridom to like completely shift her inner worldview and kind of grow and mature as an adult and realize that things that she has taken as gospel for herself in her life are not necessarily really that big of a deal in the scheme of the whole like wider world. I feel like I don't really get enough of an opportunity. I mean, that's my fault. I need to read more Australian literature, but I feel like I don't get much of an opportunity to champion small Australian authors, and so I'm very happy that I did get to chat about this book. And I did check because someone mentioned a couple of weeks ago I talked about a book by an Australian author in a video and they weren't able to find it because I don't think it had gone like internationally published. So I did check, and you can get this on Kindle. We don't love supporting Amazon, but if it's the only way for you to be able to read this book, I would say get it on Kindle. The next book I want to talk about is Blob by Maggie Sie. This was a book that I read at the start of the year, and it was sort of one of those books I read where a couple of chapters in I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be a good one. So our main character is Vi. She is kind of aimless, wandering through life. She sort of hit rock bottom, and after she gets dragged to a drag show by her coworker Rachel, she leaves the bar and she finds this gelatinous blob outside of the bar, and she decides to take it home. And the gelatinous blob grows into a man. It's definitely not, it's this, I would say, also very distinctly falls under weird girl books. Like, this is a very, very strange book. So the blob, she names Bob. She takes it home, she starts to care for it, and she realizes that she can transform this blob into this dream man that she's always wanted in her life. And she kind of starts projecting all of her loneliness and all of her control issues, because she feels so out of control in her own life, on this like poor little blob. We love weird girl books that are metaphors for growing up and discovering ourselves. Yes, we do. We love that on this channel. A lot of women on this list, Vi approaches her life with a incredibly jaded point of view, and she looks at everything through a very jaded lens. And being that we are privy to her internal monologue, that sense of skepticism really permeates every single page of this book. And in my opinion, it does get very grating at times, but as I mentioned at the beginning of this book, that's the point. I think the big difference between these characters and just characters that are smackable are that the point is you're not necessarily supposed to relate or root for this character at all stages. Her attitude towards a lot of the other characters in this book is downright mean, especially when it appears to you as the outsider that these people really truly only have the best of intentions for Vi. And so it's very frustrating as a reader to watch her adopt a bit of a woe is me attitude while simultaneously being her own biggest saboteur, because she just self-sabotages every single situation that she finds herself in. But I do think one of the great things about this character is that a lot of her sense of being so jaded and her kind of nastiness does come from a place that you can understand. It comes from a place of protection. It comes from a place of someone who has been disappointed and let down by people countless times in her life and has developed a really thick armor of prickliness to protect herself from that. And I do think that that kind of internal battle to grapple and discover self-love is one that I think a lot of people can relate to. The grumpy sunshine dynamic is a plot device or a plot stereotype or whatever you want, or a trope that is so often explored in romantic books with the main love interest. And I loved kind of watching that trope play out in a platonic sense with our characters Vi and Rachel, who work together at a hotel desk. As I've said, Vi is incredibly prickly, very despondent, and Rachel is kind of the antithesis to her. She is the stereotypical bubbly blonde white girl, and she kind of embodies all of the traits that Vi is envious of. But I do also think that Rachel does kind of portray that stereotypical sheltered girl, and so I think it helps to give a little bit of weight and a little bit of gravitas to Vi's jadedness, because you realize that not everyone is born into the circumstances that allow them to go through and move through the world in a really easy manner. And so I do think that gives Vi's nihilism a little bit of a sympathetic edge, which is helpful to you as the reader. The next book I want to talk about is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. I have talked at length about how much I love Eliza Clark on this channel. If Eliza Clark has no fans, I am dead. And while I love all of her books, Boy Parts was her first one that I read, and so it will always have a particularly soft spot in my heart. So in Boy Parts, we follow our main character, Irina, who is a fetish photographer living in England, Newcastle. She kind of spends her time finding men that she classes as ordinary on the street and taking them home to her home studio, not in that way, taking them home to her home studio and taking portrait photography of them. When she's offered the opportunity kind of a lifetime to push her career into the next realm of success, she kind of starts to spiral a little bit and spiral into obsession and madness. And I also love how this book explores that obsessive nature of the artist and really kind of like puts that under a microscope. At multiple times in the book, Eliza Clark really makes sure you understand that Irina is gorgeous and benefits from all aspects of like pretty privilege. And she also makes sure that you understand that Irina also knows that and uses that to use and manipulate and move around the chess pieces in her life. Despite having all of the leg ups that Irina has, she's not a nice person. She's disdainful, bordering on spiteful to pretty much every single other character in the book. But I think what this novel does so brilliantly is this all just serves to highlight the patriarchy of it all, right? Irina is beautiful. She adheres to all the societal norms of what is considered lusted after on the outside, but like when it comes to external beauty standards, but on the inside, she's kind of rotten to the core. She really lusts for like a friction in her life, and that kind of ends up morphing into a real bloodlust for actual physical violence, all because she's desperate to be taken seriously and really looked at by all the male counterparts in her life who cannot do so or refuse to do so simply because she's a woman. But on the other end of the spectrum, as I mentioned, Irina is not a good person. And you as the reader, I think, end up becoming really conflicted when you're confronted with bad things that happen to a character who at her core is very deliberately hateable. It kind of forces you to really grapple with some complex themes of like gender dynamics. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it's really hard to talk about this particular part of the book without spoiling the ending. So I would just really encourage you to read this book if you haven't already. And if you have, let's chat about it in the comments, because this is like one of my favorite books of all time. Bottom line is, Irina is an asshole, and I was sat for every twisted narcissistic moment of her life. The next book I want to talk about is The Pisces by Melissa Broder. So this is about our main character, Lucy, who is a PhD doing her PhD on the lost lines of Sappho's poetry. She has kind of hit rock bottom, and so she goes to her sister's house in Venice Beach to dog sit. And this is where kind of the lines of reality and fantasy within the world of the book start to blur. I think I've said it many, many times that one of the things I love most in lit fic books is when an author kind of plays with the boundaries of reality and forces you as a reader to be like, is this actually happening? Or is this like a metaphor for something? Or what's going on? But as I said, when we meet Lucy, she's really hit rock bottom in pretty much all aspects of her life. She's single. She's potentially getting her PhD funding cut off. She has no home. She has no prospects. Like, she's kind of just aimless. And you sort of get the sense that much of that might be a little bit deserved. Lucy is self-centered. She's a little bit lazy and a bit mean. She has little to no regard for anyone else around her. And she bumbles through life making poor decision after poor decision. And yet, you can't help but feel drawn to her as a character. Lucy represents a almost characterized almost caricatured version or aspect of parts of our personality that I really think we all have within ourselves, but Lucy kind of just has them all shoved into one character. For me in particular, as someone who is in their 30s and kind of, I guess, like fumbling my way through them a little bit, I really felt drawn to Lucy's character. In the book, she's portrayed as 38, and she does not really have a single aspect of her life in order. And yet she's so desperate to be loved, but so unwilling to do any of the work required to sort of bring in those parts of her life that she needs to rein in order for someone to be willing to kind of sign up for all of that. Pisces is a really beautiful look at mental illness, searching for love, an identity crisis, and it's got merman love. So really, what more could you want in a book? I ask of you, what more could you want of a book? The last book I want to talk about today is again another one of my honestly top books of 2025, and that is Green Dot by Madeleine Gray. Green Dot follows our main character Hera, who has just started working at a news article, like a newspaper. Why can't I speak? Monitoring the comments on the articles and kind of like deleting inappropriate stuff. She meets one of the journalists whose name is Arthur, and they begin an affair. He's an older married man. Hera is, I believe, 24 at the beginning, or 26 at the beginning of this book, and she's really fumbling through life. So this connection with this older man really sweeps her up into the world, or into his world. One of the things I love the most about this book is I feel like I think it helps that the author herself is the age bracket of this character, but so many times I feel like books are written and they have millennial or Gen Z characters, and it's just not the way people talk. Like, you read sentences of people talking and you're like, people don't say that. I personally felt that a lot of the conversations, particularly between the friendship group that Hera has, are just so accurate, and it's how my friends and I speak to each other, and I think it's, you know, how I hear people at my work talking to each other, and it just felt really accurate and relatable and truthful to the characters. But let's be honest, we all know a Hera, okay? We all know a girl. We've all been the girl who loses herself completely in a relationship, who gets a new partner and suddenly disappears for like weeks or months on end. And I think we can all relate to the absolute heart-wrenching euphoria that comes with a new relationship, and kind of like the endless possibilities that come in that honeymoon period. I'm bleeding. I really related to the character of Hera being a little bit, you know, as I said, aimless, not to make it, I know what I'm doing with my life, okay? Hera has kind of just finished her degree. She's watching all her friends move through the motions of adulthood and finds herself in almost like this odd pantomime of being like, oh, I'm gonna get a real job, and I'm gonna move out, and at the same time, she's incredibly disenfranchised and disappointed with where her life has ended up. Hera is smug. Hera is not a particularly good friend at the beginning of this book, and she, in my opinion, is a kind of, at the beginning at least, a deeply unlikable character, but one that I think we can all see aspects of ourselves represented in. I think anyone who has studied a creative field or has an interest in a creative field can relate to the feeling of being like, oh, well, you all go and have your real jobs, but I'm meant for so much more, and then how crushing it can be to enter the workforce as an adult and just be like, oh, actually, no, I'm not special. Like, no, I'm not the chosen one. I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy in the world trying to get by. And I don't know, like, I think that's a really relatable struggle that pretty much everyone in their 20s has probably gone through at one stage or another. So I would highly recommend Green Dot by Madeleine Gray if you want to read about a bumbling 20-something pseudo-intellectual asshole who I probably related to on far too many levels. So those are just a couple of picks for unlikable female characters. I'm trying to focus these videos on quality over quantity. So let me know what you think. You may have noticed that my most recent videos haven't included as many recommendations in like one video as I may have in the past, because I'm really wanting to try and do a bit more of a deep dive on the themes of what is in these books without the video being like 45 minutes long. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you prefer kind of like fast and dirty plot summaries with like a little bit of critique sprinkled in, but like maybe I can talk about, you know, 8 to 10 books per video, or if you'd like a bit more of a deep dive into the books themselves. I prefer a deep dive, but you know, and it's my channel, so I'm probably going to keep doing whatever I want. But I am interested in hearing what you guys think. I feel like the fact that it is, by the time this video will be going up, basically halfway through October, is deeply upsetting. I do not understand where the year has gone. It's going to be Christmas soon. It's going to be my best and worst books of 2025 video soon. I will have been doing this channel for almost a year. I think I'll have to check what time what month I posted my first video. It was either October or November, I can't remember. But how crazy that I've been doing this for a year. Thank you so much for sticking around and listening to me yap incessantly about books. If there's anything that you want me to chat about in particular in the coming year, let me know. If there's anything that you want like a part 2 on, let me know. I feel like I have struggled a little bit with videos this year for like obvious personal reasons, but also because I just haven't been reading as much. I know that what I have read this year is probably still kind of well above the average, but for me, it's not a lot. So I do feel like sometimes videos have felt like a bit struggle street because I don't want to feel like I'm yapping on about the same books all the time. I want to try and feel like every time I make a video, I'm bringing you something new and something that you may not have heard of or may not have seen in another video, and I don't want to be like yapping on about the same, 10 to 12 books over and over and over again. But I do also have a type. So, if you are looking for recommendations in any particular type of books, give a girl a yell, I'm going to be trying some new things over the coming weeks just to kind of like get a vibe on what we're going to be doing for 2026, which is crazy. As I said, I'm so close to 1,000 subscribers. So if you are someone who watches videos every week but you haven't hit that subscribe button, please do. Keep them comments coming because they really boost my ego. Just kidding, but not really. Give it a like, give it a share, get your mum to watch, get your nan to watch, get your dog to watch. I don't care. Put it on in the background, a view's a view, right? But as usual, thank you for being here with me today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, don't leave a mean comment or I will cry, and I will see you in next week's video. Bye!